Do you want your online store to be ultra-fast, fully customized to your needs, and scalable to more than 1 billion items? Imios is an ultra-fast PHP e-commerce framework. Imios, next level e-commerce. Try it now.
If you're running an application at scale in public or private clouds, you have to tame almost boundless complexity. Datadog brings together all this observability data with infrastructure metrics, traces, and logs in one integrated platform.
Vonage is a cloud communication platform that lets you integrate voice, video, and messaging into your applications. We have a load of helper libraries, including a Laravel package and a client library for PHP. You can find out more about us at developer.nexmo.com.
Talk about Laravel View Components. Yeah, I'm rocking my Corona quarantine beard and hairstyle, so don't worry about that. So my name is Marcel Pociot. I am a managing partner and developer at Beyond Code, and you can follow me on Twitter, where my handle is Marcel Pociot, and I tweet mostly about Laravel and PHP related topics. Okay, so let's code. So this is pretty much all I have for slides, so I'm going to do some live coding together with you to show you what View Components can do and how you can make use of them in your Laravel 7 applications. So let's just jump right in. Here I have a brand new Laravel 7 app. All I did is basically just modify the welcome blade. So I'm using Tailwind, and I changed the title and removed all of the boilerplate stuff that comes with Laravel. All right, so in here, I want to show you what View Components can do for you. And if you've used any of the View Components before in Laravel 6 or older, then you might think, okay, well, View Components, that's nothing new, right? View Components are there already for quite some time. And yeah, that is true, but I'm going to show you what's different with View Components this time around. So first off, let's try and create our very first View Component in Laravel 7. So I'm going to use the artisan command to create a component and then show you what's different here. So we're going to say PHP artisan make component, and I'm just going to create a sidebar component. So I'm going to call it sidebar, and it's created successfully. So if we take a look at our project structure, then we can see that in the app folder, there is now a view folder that has a component, which is called sidebar. So let's open that up. And in our resources, we have views, and there's also a new components folder called sidebar. All right, so both class and blade are pretty empty right now. So let's take a look. The blade is just an empty div. And the class is where it gets a bit more interesting. So in here we have this component called sidebar that extends from one of the Laravel components that are shipped out of the box. We have a constructor that is empty, and we have a render method where we return the view of our sidebar. So if we just add something in here, so let's just say we have a list, navigation, more links. All right. And then if we want to show this in our actual welcome view, all we need to do is use the new notation, which is X, followed by a dash, and then the name of our component. So in our case, it would be sidebar. So we had a sidebar component, and then we can close this. So if I have this in my template and then go to the browser and refresh, fair enough, we see that we added our navigation and the more links. All right. Let me just quickly center this so it's a bit easier to see. Let's do this. All right. So we have this, and if we would do the same thing with the components that were already available in earlier Laravel versions, it would be something like add component, then components.sidebar and component. And this would be exactly the same thing. So until this point, both behave the same. But here's how we can make more use of those component classes that are now in Laravel 7. So the first thing you can do is, since we now have this HTML-like syntax, we can pass attributes to our components. So in here, I could pass a title and then give it a name. So for example, let's just call it sidebar. And to accept this attribute in our component, we can go into our component class and just accept this in the constructor. So here we are going to accept a title, and then we initialize this and make sure this is public. So all the public properties on our sidebar component, or on the component class in general, are available as variables inside of our component blade file. So in here I can create an h1 title like this, and if we go to our browser and refresh, we have the title here. So sidebar foo, like this. You can just add attributes to your specific component. And as I said, all the public attributes of this class are available as attributes or as variables inside of your view components. So for example, I could also do something like public links, make an array, first, second, and then in my component file, I could do for each links as link, and then output the link in here and for each. All right, let's move this in here. And this works as well. So everything that's public inside of your component is accessible in the actual view file. Now, there are also scenarios where you want to pass not only static, like simple variables like strings or integers, but for example, you might want to pass an actual array. So if we use the same example, so the links that we have here, let's say we want to accept this in our component. So we add this to our constructor. So we want links, and then we initialize this as well. So we have this already in here. So let's just remove the default ones. So we have the title and we have links. And to pass them in here, we would do something like links equal, and then, well, we need a variable. So let's pass the variable to the welcome view first. So this is in our web PHP file. Here we have the default route, which is welcome, and then we just pass in links, and this would be something like this. Okay. So now our welcome view receives the links view data, but how can we pass it down to our actual component? So this does not work. So if I try this, we got invalid arguments applied for each, because yeah, right now we're just passing $links as a string. So instead, what you can do in Laravel is similar to how you would do it in Vue, like in view JavaScript, you just add a colon in front of it, and now the content of this will be passed as just the actual variable to the component. So if we refresh, fair enough, this just works. So now we have our links that pass in the links variable from our web PHP to the welcome, down to our sidebar components, down to our sidebar blade components view. All right. And what's also really cool is, since this is just a basic PHP class, I can do all I want in terms of type hinting the attributes. So for example, I could just say links is going to be an array. And now the next time I do this without the colon, I get an exception because the argument that was passed into my component must be of the type array, but we gave it a string. So yeah, this is just some easier to debug this and to prevent these errors in the first place. And of course, you can do this with all kinds of data, so it doesn't need to be an array. You can also pass in user objects or models or whatever into your specific components. All right. So speaking of components and attributes, what I would like to do is I would like to add some generic HTML-like attributes to my sidebar. So for example, as I'm using Tailwind, I want to style this sidebar. So I want to be able to just say class, and then give it, for example, a background, let's say BG gray 100 and text gray 900, like this. And then I want this to be available inside of my component file. Now you might think, all right, then I just add class as an additional parameter in my constructor and accept it in here. And then I populate this to be public, and then in my blade view, I can access it. Yeah, while this might work, or this will work, this is not really the recommended way of doing this, because this is just for standard attributes that you might want to pass to your specific blade components. So instead, what you can do, Laravel provides you with a attributes variable that is available within your component views. So in here, I can just say, to this div, attach all the attributes that were passed to the component. And when I do this, we now, I hope you can see it. Let me just change this to something. All right. So this should be better visible. And now all the data is passed down to the component. So if, for example, I want to add a title attribute, no, title is a bad example because we already have that. Let's just say something like a vModel. Then this would get added as well. So if I now take a look at the HTML, then we can see that this is in here too. So with the vModel example, this is probably not what you would want to do. So for example, let's say we have our component, and while we want the class attributes to be on the div, we might not want additional component attributes on like the main node on our div. So let's just say in here we would have an input. Let's just give it a border so that it's easier to see. And now I want the vModel to be associated with this input instead of it being added to our attributes down here at the up here at the div. So of course I can just copy this, and if I do this, it works. But if we take a look at the HTML, we can see that our input now has the vModel, which is good, but it also has the class attributes that we only need on the div up here. And likewise, the other way around, our div now has the vModel, but we don't need it there. So luckily, it is possible to do this in Laravel by using methods called only and except. So with these methods, you can reject or reduce the attributes however you want. So for example, I can say up here in the div, I want all the attributes except for vModel. And if we refresh, the vModel is gone now. And likewise here for the input, we want, let's say, only vModel. And then only this attribute remains on our input, and all the other attributes get added to the class up here. So like this, you can make use of generic attributes that you can attach to your Blade component. And then you can redistribute how you want to apply them within your component class. So I think this is pretty cool. Now with the example that I had, let's just say that our sidebar should provide its own kind of default styling, and then we want to add custom classes from the outside later on. So in here, we have our attributes, and what you would like to do is, I would like to add something like class, and let's say we want it always to be rounded and have a shadow. And then we add all the attributes that are passed from the outside. Now if we do this and look at the source code, then we can see that we now end up having 2 class attributes on this one div. And of course, this is not going to render properly. So to avoid this, the attributes object that we have here, the attributes variable, also allows us to merge certain things. So we can say we want all the attributes except the vModel, and then we want to merge them. So we want to merge the class attribute with these default values. And then we can get rid of our class attribute here. So this basically just says, pass in all the attributes except vModel. And when you do, merge the class attributes with these values. And now if we look at the HTML again that we output, we now only have one class output, a class attribute. It has rounded and shadow, and then we apply all the attributes that were added from the parent template. And yeah, this is what it looks like. I hope you can see it, but yeah, trust me, it's rounded and has a shadow. All right, so like this, you can merge in custom default attributes into parent attributes that you pass around. All right, so I talked about how public attributes are accessible within your components. Now I want to show you another way how you can access data, which is by using methods. So let's create a new component, and I want to create a Markdown component. So I just want a little helper component that I can pass in any kind of Markdown string, and then I want this Markdown string to be rendered as HTML within my component. And yeah, I think this is pretty nice and reusable throughout my application. So let's create a new component. PHP artisan make component Markdown. And now let's go and edit this Markdown component. So in here, we just go to our Markdown view. And what I would like to do now in my view is I want to output unescaped, because I want to output HTML. I want to somehow render whatever is given to this specific component. So let's just write some pseudocode. So I want to render the slot, so the data that was passed to this component, and then output this as HTML. So what we could do is we could create a helper function called render. We could, for example, add like a Markdown renderer class and use this one here. But what I really want to do, I want to contain all the Markdown rendering logic within my view component, because that's what they're there for. So what I can do is I can just create a new method called render. Whoop. And this render method has, let's call it render HTML, because render is already used. And this method receives the Markdown string. All right, and then we want to return the HTML representation of this. So I'm just going to reuse the Markdown class that is within the Laravel mail. And then we are going to parse this Markdown and return it. Now, to use this doesn't work, but as I said, you can access any public properties inside of those components, and likewise, you can access any public methods. So, like this, it's a public method, and I can just do it with $sign before, so I'm going to call the render HTML variable, so to say, the method of it with the slot. Okay, so let's go to our template and try it out. So in here, I'm just going to use X Markdown. And let's add some Markdown in here. Hello, Laracon EU online. This should be rendered. All right. Refresh, and there it is. So as you can see, we pass in whatever we have in here. This is the slot variable in our component, pretty much to what used to be the slot variable in the add component syntax before. So this is accessible as our slot, and in here we just render this slot to HTML and then give it to this method, and then we get our actual HTML output. So like this, this just makes it super easy to call methods within your component so that the whole logic remains in your component alone. All right. Another cool thing about components is that you can conditionally decide when you want to render them. So let's say that we have a simple logout component. So I'm just going to create a new one, logout, and I want this logout, let's say it's the logout link. I want this link to be visible only if a user is logged in, of course, because yeah, only then they need to log out. So here we just have a link that says logout, and that's it. So if we take a look, here it is. The traditional approach would be to just wrap this in an if statement. So if auth check, then we are going to log out. All right, we're not going to show it. But with view components, you can also move this logic into the component class itself. So if we go to our logout component, you can add a new method called shouldRender. And in here, I can add my logic that determines if this component should be rendered or not. So if I'm going to add auth check in here, refresh, it's still gone. And if I go to flip this condition, we see the link. So this, in my opinion, makes it really nice to have a clean syntax in our blade files while having all the logic that is required for our components contained in the actual component class. All right. So far we have only looked at these class components, but there are also something like which is called anonymous components. So you might think, okay, these classes, they're nice, but maybe I don't need them. Maybe I only want the blade file and do not actually need any additional logic. So I don't want this class in the first place, but I like this X syntax. And you can make use of this as well. So instead of using the artisan command to make a component, all you need to do is just create a component blade file. So let's just create, for example, a button component. So we just create a button blade PHP. In here we have a button, and let's say we want to give this button a title. Now to make use, or then give it a default title if it doesn't exist. To make use of this button, it just works the same way. So we can just say X button and close it, and that's it. And if I refresh, here we have our button with the default title, and then I can just pass custom attributes to it, refresh, and it just works. So just by having the blade view, if the whole class feels too heavy for you, you can still make use of this fancy new syntax and have all of the abilities to use like the attributes in here. I can do this as well. So I could also still do attributes and then have a class, let's say BG red 200. And this works the same way. So this is really nice if the whole class approach is not your thing, or even for just smaller components where you don't need the additional logic that comes with a class. And last but not least, there's also a third way on how you can write these components, and that is an inline component. This is pretty much the other way around. If you don't think, the class is too much, but if you think, the blade view, I don't actually need a blade view because I only want to, for example, output a button and have some additional logic within my class. You can do this as well. So let's just create another component, let's say input, and then we can pass a flag to this make command called inline. Now, if we take a look at our structure in our application, we can see that we don't have a view for this input component, but we do have a class. So let's take a look at the class, and then we can see that our render method is no longer returning a view file, but instead we are just returning the raw HTML that we want to output. This might not be what everyone's looking for, mixing HTML with PHP, but I think it's pretty cool to just have the ability, if there are really smallish components that don't need their own blade file, but still where you need some kind of additional logic in here. So in here I could just have an input, some placeholder, and now to make use of this, I'm just going to say X input, and it's the same thing. So now I have the input that I can use, and if I want to extend it, I need to add the additional attributes to the constructor, then make them public, and perform any additional checks or whatever I want to do, and then render the blade component based on that. So now in here I could also, for example, access just blade variables as if they were present. So let's just try this out. We have a public value, and if I refresh, then we can see that this value is now placed inside of my input. So these strings here behave exactly like blade views and have access to all the methods and all the public attributes, just as you would use a blade view that lives somewhere else. All right, so yeah, these are the big new things in view components. I hope that you now see a use for them and see that they can make your life a bit easier. I really like the ability to have everything within one class, so all the logic is in there. And if, for example, there would be a PHP Storm plugin that makes use of all the data and the data that gets passed to the component class, I think this is super powerful, because suddenly you know exactly which kind of data is passed to which view and what value it has. So yeah, this is the bird's eye view of Laravel view components, and I hope that it cleared some things up. I hope you learned something new, and I hope that you find use for these view components in your next Laravel project. Thank you.
Do you want your online store to be ultra-fast, fully customized to your needs, and scalable to more than 1 billion items? Imios is an ultra-fast PHP e-commerce framework. Imios, next level e-commerce. Try it now.
If you're running an application at scale in public or private clouds, you have to tame almost boundless complexity. Datadog brings together all this observability data with infrastructure metrics, traces, and logs in one integrated platform.
Vonage is a cloud communication platform that lets you integrate voice, video, and messaging into your applications. We have a load of helper libraries, including a Laravel package and a client library for PHP. You can find out more about us at developer.nexmo.com.